Happy Friday, and thanks for tuning into Radio Free Rhinecliff.org and this show in particular. Correct me if I'm Norm. I'm your host, Norm, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Dana Polan. Dana, thank you so much for being here.
I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I wanted you to listen to the theme music because I thought, oh, well, you were born in France. You've got
No, that actually, there's a website that has it wrong.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know where they got that from. I studied in France.
Oh, but you weren't. Where were you born?
New York City.
Oh, man.
And lived all around this area, went elsewhere for graduate school, did my French. I did a doctorate in France, but I'm New York. I'm a New Yorker. And now I'm definitely a Rhinecliffer.
Yeah. And you were knighted in France.
Yes.
The Chevalier des Arts or something.
Yes.
How did that happen? That's so. That's really cool.
So there's every year a certain number of people in the arts are picked, especially outside of France, are picked for contributions to cross-cultural exchange. The year I was picked as a Chevalier, so a knight. Emma Thompson was picked as a commandant, so commander, and I would take commands from her. So. Yeah.
Let's
Why
just
not,
go there.
right?
What kind of commands would you like to get from Emma Thompson?
Go speak to the French.
Don't speak to the French.
No, go speak to the French.
Go speak to the French. So do you get an honorarium in front of your name in France?
No,
Is there a sir or anything like that?
They sometimes do parties, and I hear about these parties, but the year I got it, for some reason, I didn't get invited to a party. But that's okay.
Really?
Yes.
That's not okay. I want to
the
fight somebody
commandant
now.
get a little pin. I don't have a pin.
Well, how is commandant higher than
Yes.
knight?
Oh, yeah. They're the commanders of the knights.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Yes.
And do they do one each year, or
No,
they have a whole bunch of
There's a
knights?
whole bunch. Yeah. I don't know much more about it than that.
Right.
And someone else nominated me, which I think is the procedure.
Yeah.
The whole process is a mystery to me, but it's kind of funny, so I include it in my biography.
Sure, absolutely. And do they ask you for nominations in the years following
I have
year?
had no communication from anybody.
None.
But if you know France at all, the French bureaucracy is simultaneously very, very rigorous and absolutely sloppy.
Uh-huh.
So it might be that they intend to
That's right.
contact people, but it could be that the file is buried under some paperwork in somebody's office, and they'll discover it 40 years from now.
Yard sale in Normandy with your medal, your
Yes,
medallion
right.
on a gold chain.
So anyway, it's just a humorous part of my career.
But you were there studying
Yes.
also.
Yeah.
And what were you studying in France?
So I have always been studying cinema, and I went to France on a grant in 79-80 to write my dissertation.
A grant from whom?
Something called the George Lurcy Foundation. Don't ask me more than that.
Okay.
I just know they said,
Thanks for cutting me off.
You've gotten this award, and it's for writing your doctorate. And I went to France to do the doctorate. And what was nice was I had already started in the academic job market, even though I hadn't finished my dissertation. And my first job, the first job I had was at the University of Pittsburgh, and they contracted me to be an assistant professor before I left for France. And they said, we can delay you coming to Pittsburgh for a year. So I got to have the year working on my dissertation, finished it, and started at the University of Pittsburgh in 1980.
Wow.
And that's when cinema was in. Cinema has a very complicated history, but it could be in communication departments. It could be in radio, TV departments. In my case, it was an English department. And that's often traditional. A lot of English departments would add in film courses, sort of film as literature.
So where it falls in academia.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it's only later that you start to get, I mean, there's some examples earlier, but it's only really later in the 80s and 90s that you start to get a lot of standalone cinema departments.
Right. And is that pretty much standard now, standalone cinema departments?
Not everywhere, but a lot of places. And there's clearly a kind of ring of very top schools, USC, UCLA, NYU, where I am now.
Where you'd be surprised if they didn't have a standalone.
Right.
And
NYU is actually one of the longer ones. NYU started cinema study way back in the 1920s, 1930s. I mean, one of the things you see, because one of the books I did was on the history of cinema study, and it sort of goes in fits and starts, and sometimes the same university will have a film course in the teens, and then it'll drop away, and then somebody else starts a new film track in the 20s. I mean, Columbia is a very good example of that, because it's now one of the top MA and BA programs, and it was also one of the very
For
first
cinema studies.
For cinema studies,
Not necessary for making movies.
yeah, it's totally different.
Right.
For example, I'm right now in the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU.
Yeah.
It's a 12-story building. 10 and 11 are undergraduate and graduate film production. We're on the 6th floor and have virtually nothing to do with them. And there's not a lot of interaction.
Are the creative people? I mean, I'm just thinking offhand, like Spike Lee and Jim Jarmusch. Didn't they go to NYU? Are the creative people strongly encouraged to avail themselves of the history people? Which
Yes.
is, you know,
At NYU, it's an encouragement. After Pittsburgh, I went to the USC, University of Southern California, and there it was a requirement that all production people took history. And they could petition to try and get out of taking history of cinema classes, and we would systematically deny their petitions. And the idea was they need to know the history. And in the best cases, they would come back to us and thank us afterwards. Because, you know, the very earliest history of cinema is people making 30-second, one-shot, black and white film, no sound. And then you start to develop narrative, and then you eventually add soundtracks. And the best of the production students realized that that's what they were doing in their production classes. You know,
Right.
They first learn how to use the camera. They learn how to take a scene. Then they learn how to put together shots and create a narrative. So they're kind of recapitulating the history of cinema.
yeah. So in the best cases, they came back and thanked you.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
let's hear about the worst cases.
Oh, there wasn't really, but yeah.
Right. And so did you ever think you wanted to make a movie?
There was a very brief moment when I was an undergraduate and I took a filmmaking class. I thought, if you're going to study film, you should learn how to make. And
Is what I'm
this was a
getting at.
period where it was all celluloid. It was way before the digital.
Right.
And it was great. We had these old Army surplus cameras that the speed would change depending upon the temperature. Like if it was really cold out, the motors would run slow.
Yeah.
So you would budget which scene you're going to film on a very cold day. But the thing I really loved in filmmaking was editing. And again, this was celluloid, so you would actually cut the strip of film, you'd strip a little bit of the emulsion off the end of each piece of film and put glue there and glue the two pieces together.
And that's your fade?
I loved doing it, but I would pull all-nighters, not because I needed to, but because I liked just staying up and editing.
Yeah.
And I realized if I went in that direction as a career, I wouldn't be able to do anything else. And so I just sort of said no.
Because you were so enamored of the process of editing?
Yeah.
Like clipping a couple of frames and hanging it up
Right,
somewhere.
and staying up all night to do that. Yeah.
Staying up trying to find those two frames that you cut out.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that was a crazy era of film editing.
Yes, yeah.
So did you make small films, short films?
Yes. Luckily, they have been consigned to the oblivion of history. I don't think they exist anymore, and they were pretty bad. Student films, I shouldn't say this because I teach in a school that has filmmakers. Student films can be very bad.
Sure.
And in the 60s, in the 70s was not when I was in college. They were very artsy and pretentious. Like, if there was a mirror, you would film a scene in a mirror. If there was a rear car view mirror, you would definitely film a scene in a rear car view mirror because the car view mirrors are slightly curved, so you'd get this distorted look. And then I did my undergraduate at Cornell, and Cornell has lots of hills. And in the 70s, hills mean Bergman-esque or Fellini-esque scenes of characters dressed in wild clothes, dancing across the hillside.
Oh, right.
And there were so many of those. If you found some branches on the ground, you immediately had people tuck their hands in and put the branches where their hands would have been, and they would go around in the scene with branch hands, which symbolized something. I don't know what.
Did you have branch hands in those films of yours that are now?
Mine, I think maybe because I was already anticipating studying, and my main area of study is American film. I made sort of parodies of American genres. So one of my films was a sort of early film noir, crime film, detective, And this was a period where we didn't have sync sound. It was a tape recorder. And I don't know if you've ever worked with tape recorders in relation to images, but the speed of the tape changes because the tape warbles and stuff. So you can't get absolute sync.
And especially with old, so I'm guessing like student equipment.
Yeah. So what you would do like a countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and turn both things on at the same time. And it couldn't be sync. So it had to be voiceover narration. Because if you try people speaking, it's going to be off by a frame. And it'll go 2 frames over, 2 frames back. But if you say, it was a dark and stormy night, I walked down Mean Street. So doing a film noir was perfect for that.
Yeah.
Chandler-esque kind of narration.
Yeah, I guess. And so the slates were just pointless because everything was moving at a different speed?
Yeah.
And how long were your student films? And the way you described it sounds like a feature.
Yeah. 5 to 10 minutes.
And you've never had the urge since then to pick up a camera or a phone?
No. Although one thing that's interesting, so as I was saying, there's not a lot of interaction between the production departments at NYU and the cinema study departments, but a lot of our students actually don't want to become film scholars. They want to go into the industry, and they see cinema study. They see cinema study as kind of a backdoor way into that. They will, they try and transfer over into production, whatever. So they were asking for production classes in our department because it's very hard to get into the production classes upstairs, especially there's a lot of demand on equipment.
It's easier to get into cinema studies.
Yeah, it's easier to get into cinema study, but we don't have a budget to suddenly bring in a whole bunch of equipment. We created a course about 10 years ago that's been really successful called Cell Phone Cinema, where the students make films with their cell phones.
Sounds right.
And everybody has a cell phone. Everybody knows how to edit with it. And NYU, this is sort of off the subject, NYU has a very big global campus. There's actual campus buildings elsewhere. So there's a campus building in Berlin, et cetera. They have now picked up the model of the cell phone cinema course, and something like 14 of our campuses are teaching cell phone cinema as one of the things the students do. And the idea is the course should be about the city you're in. So, like, for example, NYU LA, they do a cell phone film about the LA experience. And in that course, they watch LA films. Some are films like LA Confidential, but they also watch Tangerine. I don't know if you know the Sean Baker film.
No.
It's Sean Baker early in his career. It's about trans people in LA, trans prostitutes in LA. And he shot it completely on an iPhone.
Wow.
And it's a really great looking film. And it's really interesting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So are there things, I mean, if you were in charge of...
He's another NYU grad.
Oh, yeah. That's good. I mean, there's a lot of really sort of famous and successful...
Yeah, I mean, the important one for me and for my department is Martin Scorsese, who was a student and then became a student in the early 60s, became a graduate student towards the end of the 60s, and was doing a MFA, a master's in fine arts in production. But in the early 60s, the distinction between production and critical study wasn't as extreme. So he actually TA'd some courses in cinema study.
Right.
And one of our older professors who's still around told me that Scorsese was his TA in like 1962. And Scorsese was someone who would remember individual shots. So he'd say, now the fourth shot of, and you, and he knew exactly what was in that fourth shot.
Yeah. What a crazy ability to have.
Yeah.
And how perfect to have that ability in that job.
Right. Yeah.
Huh. So you are, I think, the Martin Scorsese chair of the Department of Cinema Studies at NYU Tisch.
Right. So what happened is about 3 years ago, we got an endowment from, actually not from Scorsese, who's not incredibly rich. We got it from George Lucas and his spouse, Melody Hobson, in the name of Martin Scorsese. And they'd already endowed the School of Cinema TV at USC, is the George Lucas. It's not It's not called the George Lucas School, but all the money for USC's film production program came from Lucas.
Right.
And I think for a lot of reasons, including that Lucas doesn't have the same artistic credibility that a Scorsese has. I think Lucas is seen more as an entertainer. He gets a kind of cultural cred by recognizing Scorsese this way.
Oh, geez. All right. What does that mean? He's seen more as an entertainer instead of an artist.
Yeah. So,
like the way Norman Rockwell's an illustrator and not a.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Lucas and especially Spielberg are big fans of Norman Rockwell and collect his art and sort of are into this sentiment. And I like Norman Rockwell a lot, but
love him. And not just as an illustrator, but as a really fine artist.
Yeah, but a good example of the specificity of Scorsese compared to some of these people who are the same period and are his compatriots and are his friends is Stephen. I don't know if you know the Scorsese remake of Cape Fear with Nick Nolte and Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
That was originally supposed to be a Spielberg film, and it was going to minimize it to an extreme all the problems in the family. Because if you remember the film, Nick Nolte's had an affair, or he's maybe even had multiple affairs. Jessica Lange, who's playing his wife, has never completely forgiven him, and the film is about the tensions in their marriage, and then the tensions with their daughter, who's going through puberty and is discovering sexuality. None of that was in the Spielberg version, because Spielberg is a great entertainer. His films are, especially in a certain period, are very strong, but are not really self-questioning and not really trying to be edgy, whereas Scorsese films are edgy. So I think and Lucas is not ever really an edgy director. There's Star Wars has action, people die. The way I talk about the 70s is, especially when Lucas comes on the scene. I mean, he's already been on the scene, but when he really hits it big with Star Wars, you start to get a whole series of films that move fast, that you're not supposed to think about too much, and you're not supposed to think about the bad things that happen. So if you remember Star Wars, early in that film, Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle, he's sort of an adoptive kid, get killed. There's a raid on their farm, and Luke maybe has a half tear down his cheek, but then realizes now he can go on to his next great adventure. And you start to see that a lot in 70s film.
In Disney.
Yeah. So you don't linger over death. It's not something to worry about. Whereas Scorsese is very much about violence, death, toxic masculinity, all these things that you don't see in a Lucas film. So I think by endowing the department, Lucas is saying, I recognize and can acknowledge this other side to cinema.
Right. And it sounds like the thing that you would need to move from entertainer to artist is something edgy and something self-questioning. More psychological
and something
richness.
To discuss. I mean, there's not a lot to discuss when you come out of Star Wars. You may love it.
Yeah.
But you're going to say, that was great.
No. It's like, wait a minute, was he his dad?
Right, yeah. Why did they have an XK4 lightsaber, not an XK5 lightsaber? But, with Goodfellas, you can discuss the morality. You can discuss how the characters are.
So are there directors who work on both sides of this divide?
Well, I think Spielberg, for example, later in his career started to get more serious, and I think around The Color Purple really wanted to be recognized as a serious filmmaker. I just came out with a book last year on Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I saw that.
It's
so interesting.
I quote Spielberg at one point. He says, Close Encounters is not a film, it's a movie. And I totally get that distinction.
So he's self-aware anyway, even if the characters aren't.
But I would bet he would think that films after The Color Purple, I mean, Color Purple's not a movie, and if you mean by that, you mean an escapist diversion. Lincoln is not, Saving Private Ryan.
Right.
Those are films. And in Spielberg's case, films, this is going to sound a little cynical, designed to get Oscar nominations. I mean, Spielberg, I think, wants a Best Picture, Best Director.
He's never gotten one?
He has.
Oh.
Yes, but I'm going to forget for what.
All right, well, I'll ask you this while you're remembering, as I'm sure you will. Back on the other side of this imaginary line, there should be a name for that line, like the magic no line or whatever.
Right.
Who are your guilty pleasures? Who are directing just the tawdry, lightweight, fluffy, fast car, whatever you like?
I guess I would say they're not guilty pleasures because I absolutely acknowledge the need for entertainment.
Okay.
And they are pleasures. They are not thoughtful pleasures. One of my favorite films is the very first Die Hard. I think it's an absolutely well-made film. I think
it's a film, not just a movie.
I think it's a movie. Yeah.
Okay.
And the parts of it where it's a little more serious, like when at the end she says that her name. This is after she's been saved by him. I don't know if you remember the film well, but they've broken up. She's taken her maiden name, Holly Gennaro, and he's sort of pissed at that. At the end of the film, she says, "I'm Mrs. John McClane," so she's re-admitting his patriarchal hold over her. And that's a serious moment. It's one I sort of cringe at. But I think the rest of the movie is just total fun.
You cringe at it because it really doesn't belong in that movie?
Well, because it's like
cliched.
It's a putting down of the woman who shows herself to be strong and resourceful. And I think it's part of, a lot of 80s films. So I'm going to forget the year of Die Hard. I want to say 81, 82. There's a whole kind of anti-feminist backlash in a number of films that are about hard-bodied men. So it's Schwarzenegger.
Road Warrior.
Yeah. But even, Mel Gibson is buff, but not as buff as, say, a Schwarzenegger, a Bruce Willis, a Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
And they often have women accompany them, but it's really the man's journey, and it's about the assertion of masculinity.
Right.
The other thing you get in the 80s, which is very different, is men who are almost more sensitive than women, so they usurp the cliche of the caring, soft, gentle woman, and it's almost like they're more feminist.
Right.
So you get things like Tootsie, where at the end of Tootsie, he says to her, and I always get this quote wrong because it's very convoluted, he says to the Jessica Lange character something like, "I was a better woman with you as a man than I've ever been with a woman as a man," something like that. And it's like, I can be both.
Man with you as a woman than I've ever
been with a woman as a man.
Yeah.
Yes. And
it's a great line.
And but what he's doing is he's saying, I can be all things. I can be soft and sensitive while masculine. And then she says something like, "Can I borrow that dress that Dorothy had?" And he says, "Sure, but it's time for one of us to wear the pants in this relationship." So it's both, I have a dress that I can lend you, but I can still be the manly man.
And at the same time, I was thinking about this commercial, a TV commercial around that era for this perfume called Angeli. And it was a woman saying, "I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never let you forget you're a man."
Right.
So we see women sort of like stepping into this other thing.
Yeah.
So were those some of the first movies for you where you saw roles, traditional gender roles being
I think that, there's examples earlier. You get, for example, and some film historians have talked about screwball comedies of the 30s where you start to get really assertive women. In the 40s, a lot of film noir are about the femme fatale, the woman who's stronger than the man and controls him, manipulates him. So, for example, Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity. And at the end, they're punished, but they get a good ride for a very long time until that ending. And, in the 30s and 40s, one of the things the studios discovered was they'd get fan mail, and like not a lot, but a number of film noir have a good woman that the hero should go with, but then the bad woman pops up and seduces him away. And you see that, for example, in The Killers from 1946. Burt Lancaster is a boxer. He could go wrong. He could go right. He goes to a party with his pure blonde, innocent, simperingly saccharine girlfriend, but at the party is dark-haired Ava Gardner. and immediately he's sort of forgetting his girlfriend and takes the wrong path.
Yeah.
Now, we're supposed to say, well, he made a mistake, yet the studios would get all this fan mail saying, we couldn't stand that simperingly nice woman.
Isn't that funny?
You know, Ava Gardner was so much more of a role model because she stood up for what she wanted.
Right.
Even though she's supposed to be, you know, the venal, corrupt character. So
Yeah.
I think it's that kind of play with gender
It's
is
so interesting.
is around.
But also, Ava Gardner, she had a wild life as a human, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she invented like Wi-Fi, I think, or all kinds of
No,
stuff.
no. I know what you're thinking.
I'm
Which
thinking
is
of-
Hedy Lamarr,
Oh, Hedy Lamarr, that's
who
it.
invented sonar,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
well, she co-invented.
Right.
Ava Gardner, and I know about this because right now I'm co-writing a book on Frank Sinatra, and you can't write about Frank Sinatra without writing about Ava Gardner. She was a wild woman who knew what she wanted, which was fun. And she, in her autobiography, she basically says, I had no talent. You know, I got Oscar nominated for Mogambo, but I was not a good actor. I had no talents elsewhere. I couldn't have held down a career. All I wanted to do was have fun, which in her case basically meant having affairs.
Right.
You know, so going off with bullfighters was a big thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you're co-writing this book about Frank Sinatra.
It's for so I have a friend who I discovered I started teaching a course on Frank Sinatra, and I knew very little about Sinatra, and I wasn't a fan, but I also wasn't not a fan. It was just someone I knew about.
Right.
And then I thought, he clearly is important in the history of the 20th century. I need to know more about him. And the way I learn about any topic is to teach a course on it. So I started teaching courses about 12 years ago on Frank Sinatra. And I wanted to find out who's written anything interesting on Sinatra. So I went online, started doing some research. And there's things like Kitty Kelly, you know, tell-all scandal biographies.
Oh, right.
But I was looking for something that's like what he means in the culture. And I came across this book by someone named Charles Granada called Sessions with Sinatra. And it's about what happens in the recording studio and how Sinatra interacted with his collaborators and what he did across the decades. It's sort of how engineers worked with him and how his voice worked with different microphones. But it's not at all geeky. It's absolutely fascinating about the collaborative process. So I wrote the guy not knowing anything, this Charles Granada, and I got like the fastest reply.
And what did you write?
I said, doing a course on Sinatra. I like your book. Would you consider coming to my class? And like a minute later, I get this, I will so be in your class. I live to talk about Sinatra. And it turns out that Chuck, so we hit it off. He came to the first class, and my spouse jokes that it's like it's my second marriage because Chuck and I finish each other's sentences.
Oh, geez.
And so it's great. He's a former New Jersey cop who on the side was listening to Sinatra, collecting stuff. And then he decided to leave the police force and became a music producer. And he works for Sony. He does remastery of classic albums. And it's a fascinating process. So he's been to every one of my classes. And we decided to write something together. And we tried different ideas for different series. There's a series of books in England. There's a publisher called Reaction, Reaction with a K.
Okay.
And they do series. And some of them are known in the U.S. So, for example, there's a series on food, on individual food items, like the hot dog, the hamburger.
No.
There's one on animals, the shark, the blah, blah, blah. But there's one one of their series is called Reverb, and it's on singers and places. So there's a David Bowie in Berlin. There's a Beatles in Hamburg.
Wow.
There's a Monkees in Hollywood. So Chuck and I proposed a volume to them, and the title sort of explains it. It's Hoboken to Hollywood, The American Places of Frank Sinatra. So it's on 5 places in particular. So Hoboken, Manhattan, Hollywood, Palm Springs, and Las Vegas. With sort of side trips, we have a little bit on Atlantic City, a little bit on Miami.
Did you visit all those locales?
I have, yes.
Yes.
And I mean, I knew L.A. of course already. I knew Manhattan. I know I've now done several Sinatra odysseys to Hoboken.
Right. What was his house in Palm Springs like?
What?
What was his house in Palm
Oh,
Springs
so
like?
that was great. So in the fall, I was invited to a film noir convention because I also have this interest in noir. I was invited to a film noir convention in Palm Springs, and I decided to combine that with Sinatra research. And it was to go to different sites that had been important for him. Like there's a thing called the Purple Room, which is a restaurant all in purple that's very Rat Pack and has quotes from Sinatra on the walls. And Sinatra lived in 3 houses or 3 pads at different times in his life in Palm Springs. And I almost got to see the third of the 3, which is where he lived out the end of his life. The first one was a real bachelor pad called Twin Palms, because it has these 2 palm trees. And it's now a wedding and events space. So I wrote to the people in charge of it saying, could I come by? And they said yes. So I got to tour that.
Nice.
He had a second house in Rancho Mirage, which was a compound, like 2 acres with 11 little casitas, little buildings around a main building.
Yeah.
I can't say whether I was able to visit that one or not. I have to leave it at that. But I did, the first one in Palm Springs is fabulous, and it's so bachelor pad. It's sliding glass walls, orange bedspreads because that was his favorite color. Every room communicates with every other room, which was a big thing in the 50s anyway. You know, the open floor plan.
Yeah.
You know, so you can go from living room to audio room to party room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, this is more anecdotal, but it goes back to Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner lived with him for a while when they married, and then they broke up, and that's when he eventually moved to Rancho Mirage. But Sinatra could be, and I'm the first to admit this, could be a real jerk in a lot of ways, around women, around all sorts of things. But he also had this kind of code that at times he tried to adhere to. And one part of it was a woman has to lead her life and a man has to lead his life. So he made sure the bathroom had a separate sink for him and her.
Right.
But that's one of the sinks has this big crack in it, which they've kept since the 50s. And it's from one of them throwing a champagne bottle at the other. And they had this, I mean, they were both very high-strung people. I mean, their first date, they went out in the desert and they shot up road signs and then were arrested. So it was like wild. And they would have wild fights. I mean, knock down, drag out, throw the clothes out. What?
Egads.
Yeah. But then they'd have, how do I want to say, sexually violent making up. I mean, you know, and according to, depending on who you talk to, one of them found the other, either Ava Gardner in the pool with the pool cleaning guy or Frank Sinatra in bed with Lana Turner. Someone threw a champagne bottle and it hit the sink and they laughed at it, decided to make up, but also decided to keep the crack in the sink.
Right.
So these are the kind of, the book, I don't want it to be just gossip, but it's part of how he lives these different places.
Yeah.
And in particular, Palm Springs is interesting because it was very clearly supposed to be a break from work for him.
Yeah.
It wasn't a break from play. I mean, he still went out and there's a whole club
I'm
scene.
sure it wasn't a break from celebrity either.
No, he would go to clubs and be seen.
Yeah.
But he didn't have a recording studio in Palm Springs. He would take scripts and he would take songs, but it was really to get away. And he sings no song directly about Palm Springs, although some people think Summer Wind is a kind of Palm Springsy kind of song. So that was, and then I think it was in January, I went to Las Vegas for 2 days, which is about all I could stand and sort of all I needed, and just to see some of the, whatever survives of Frank Sinatra in Palm Springs. And there's very little. In Palm Springs, Las Vegas. Okay. Las Vegas is, I think, a city of active forgetting of its own past. You know, it's constantly dynamiting old casinos.
In active forgetting of its own past. I like that.
Yeah.
New York City's a little bit that way, too. I mean, it's just never done.
There's a book about New York called, I forget the exact title, but it's something about, the subtitle is something like New York and creative destruction. And the idea is New York destroys to replace with something more, the next creative thing that comes along.
Yeah.
And Vegas is that in a different way. So, for example, the Venice, which has gondoliers and all this kind of stuff, was where the Sands Hotel was in the 50s, which is Sinatra's hotel. And in the middle of the outdoor area of the Venice, there's this little plaque that says the Rat Pack was here on this spot. But it's so hidden. I asked the guards, no one knew. And finally, I went online, found some videos of the plaque. I showed it to the guard. He said, "Oh, I can recognize it from the car going by." And he walked me over to it. But until that moment, he hadn't even known there was this Rat Pack.
Wait, so I've never been to Vegas. So Vegas is not sort of selling the Rat Pack tour?
Well, that's the other side of it. There's a kind of, at times, well, in one case, I'll call it crass, but there's a kind of reverent, sporadic attempt to remember him. But they're playing to a different crowd now. It's younger. There is in one of the top casinos, there's a Sinatra restaurant. That's, again, orange is because that was his favorite color. There's pictures of Sinatra. There is a dessert that's a chocolate mousse in the shape of a Sinatra fedora. But it's not a officially sanctioned, restaurant. It's just in the style of the more crass side. And my last night, I was only there 2 nights. I walked to this, and it was like miles out of the town. There's a crummy little, not even casino, that has a Sinatra impersonator. And if you remember the Lounge Lizard that Bill Murray would play on Saturday Night Live, it was sort of like that.
Yeah, he sang the Star Wars.
Yes. And this was like the most low-level non-casino, because actually they don't have gambling, and it's basically a senior citizen retirement home.
But just betting on shuffleboard.
Yeah, and the tables are card tables, and there's linoleum on the floor, and there's like 4 performance venues in this space, and one is like 70s nostalgia music, and then one is blah 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 blah, and then one is Michael Sinatra, who is his grandson, who sings Sinatra, but has the worst voice ever. He basically sounds like Jerry Lewis doing a Jerry Lewis impersonation of himself. So it's like, "I've got you under my skin." And it's just like, oh my God.
I hope that Michael Sinatra is just the most naturally happy and content person ever.
Oh, he seems totally in his skin.
Because that's a tough gig.
Yeah. But, clearly he's doing this because he has Sinatra as his last name. And for me, there was something a little sad about it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a number of different ways.
Yeah. Many. Wow, what a gig. I wonder how long he's been doing it, how long he will continue doing it.
I don't know. Must be in his 50s, maybe 60s.
So he's been doing that for decades.
Yeah.
You're not going to stop now.
No. So that was kind of sad.
Yeah. So let me ask you, because you write about cinema and film and sometimes movies, but most of your stuff is not about celebrities. Have you written books focused on any particular celebrities before the Sinatra thing?
No, I mean, I have some essays on individual celebrities, more because I'm not trying to do fan appreciation and not gossip. I mean, I'm much more about Hollywood studios, Hollywood genres. So film noir, for example. I did do one, there's probably something else, but I did do one essay that I don't usually like to talk about my own work, but when I'm proud of something, I really am proud of it. I did a piece on Warren Beatty as filmmaker and actor, and especially it was right around the moment where they were even talking about Beatty as a presidential candidate.
Right.
And I was interested in his liberal politics, and then I wanted to think about how that might show up in his films. But I was also struck by, here's this flashy playboy kind of guy, and yet he dies in a lot of his films, and I was really struck by that. Bonnie and Clyde, Bulworth, Bugsy, so there's on the one hand this guy with a liberal dream that we can better society, yet in his films every hope is cut off because someone's going to shoot you down.
Yeah.
So I wrote it. That was the thing about, but that was also because John Reed in the film he gets the directing Oscar for.
Oh yeah, don't ask me. But why?
Reds. So I was interested because
all I could think of was Shampoo.
Yeah, where he doesn't die, but he loses out at the end. And Reagan is elected, and that's how the film ends. So the crashing down of liberal dreams was for me interesting.
Yeah. So do you think films are very good at being persuasive, philosophically persuasive?
That's a great question. I don't think there's an easy answer.
And without mentioning Leni Riefenstahl.
Yeah, I think what I'm particularly talking about are fiction films from a system that is not trying to be directly propagandistic. There may be propaganda as a side effect, but I think it's very hard to go from a fiction film to any direct effect. And I think that's different. I have a friend who teaches at Bard, who you should bring on the show sometime, Joshua Glick, and he's writing about left-wing and right-wing documentary, especially right-wing documentary. And most of us don't know a lot of these films that are made by the Christian right. Will show in movie theaters. Red Hook, sometimes the Lyceum in Red Hook, sometimes rents out the theater in the morning for evangelical right-wing documentaries about whatever. And most
about the joys of atomic energy.
Yeah, and most liberals don't know about these films.
Right.
Go near them, but they're very persuasive to a particular. What do I want to say? They're speaking to the converted.
Preaching to the choir.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I don't think Hollywood films preach to the choir in the exact same way. And one of the things I'm struck by in any period is you can find a range of attitudes in films, sometimes in the same film. One of the things that I'm interested in recent films are films that try and have it both ways. They'll endorse a position and then make fun of the very position they're endorsing. So
Right.
I just recently rewatched Barbie, which I think is a very interesting film.
Yeah.
But it's hard to know, is this a feminist film? Is it an anti-feminist film? Is it a film about women being turned into toys? Is it challenging that? And a lot of recent American film is, I don't think, ideologically graspable in any simple way. You're trying to appeal to a lot of different people at one and the same time, and you're in this kind of cynical, postmodern, anything goes. We'll hold out an ideology and then break it down in the next moment.
Right. And it didn't seem that it was that way in the 40s and 50s.
No. I think there's a different kind of clarity.
The first movie I ever noticed that in was Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
They ended up with a quote from Martin Luther King and Malcolm X.
Right.
And I was pissed. I'm like, no, pick
one. Right. Yes.
Pick one.
Yeah.
But it just dawned on me as you're talking, like earlier on, like Jimmy Stewart was doing the right thing, damn it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is a great example. There's a professor who just retired from UC Riverside. Riverside. Eric Smoodin, who wrote a book on Frank Capra, and one of his chapter on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is on, among other things, the fan mail that they got for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And very little of it was what I would call aesthetic. They're not saying, I like the cinematography or I like the acting. It's, I like the politics. And people would say, Mr. Stewart, why don't you yourself run for senator? And completely blurring, him as an actor and the character he's playing. And then they would get the big filibuster he does at the end.
Yeah.
They got endless requests for a copy of the filibuster, including a lot of pastors and priests and reverends would say, I want to deliver that as my sermon next week. So again, confusing fiction film and real life pedagogy, in this case, a kind of pedagogy about government.
Right, which is dangerous if you're trying to make propaganda
Right.
one way or the other, really.
Yeah.
Is there good propaganda?
That's a great question. I think good propaganda is good to whoever's on the side of that particular position.
Right. Huh, interesting. What do you think of Frank Capra? People love or hate him.
Yeah, I mean, Capra was really impactful at a particular moment. We were talking about Norman Rockwell earlier, and it's in a way similar. It's a standing up for certain American virtues that have now gotten corrupted by the current government, but and sometimes can seem hokey, but they become, I think, objects of nostalgia, especially in a moment where we're not seeing that basic sense of decency and moral propriety and uprightness in government.
And looking back over the last 1 or 2 or 3 decades, do you see popular movies that maybe helped lead to MAGA and to where we are now?
Yeah, I guess I'm suspicious of saying that any movie is the leading cause.
Not leading, but just helped us get here.
I think, I was talking before about 80s movies, the sort of hard-bodied movies. I think they are making an argument for restoring a certain kind of masculinity. I don't think there's a direct line between that and today's world. Luke Skywalker, when he comes to rescue Princess Leia, says, "I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you." And you could say that that's a moment of masculine heroism. But does anybody become a hero because they're watching Star Wars at that moment says, "Oh, I want to be just like Luke Skywalker"? I mean, we do have to remember people know they're watching fictions. I think one change in recent movies is that it's harder to accept that they're not fictions because the films constantly remind us that they're fictions. It's hard to believe heroism when it's a Lego figure in the Lego movie. I mean, the Lego movie,
which you wrote a book about.
Yes. I mean, the Lego movie is completely about the need for a hero to come along and save the world. But it's still about Legos. It's not, you're not going to go, "Wow, he saved the world. I want to be just like that Lego figure in that movie."
Yeah.
So it's again,
or I want to be
level of unseriousness, which I don't think we see. To go back to the example we're talking about, you don't see that level of unseriousness in a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You can disagree with the message of Mr. Smith, but it's earnest. I think today's films, and I don't mean to say that a lack of earnestness is bad, but they're not trying to be earnest.
right.
Barbie at times is very earnest. There's the famous speech that one of the mother makes about what it means to be a woman today. But there's a lot of absolutely silly moments. Ken singing about Ken, and so I think today's movies are often a blend of the very earnest and the very silly in the same movie.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
Do you like that?
At times, I wish movies would be a little less wishy-washy about what they're about. I mean,
I always
the film
do.
that I know a lot of other people liked, and I really didn't like, was Everywhere,
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, which I just thought was arbitrary. It was whatever they wanted at any one moment. And then you would read reviewers who would say it's really about a woman finding herself, standing up. She's just a lowly owner of a laundromat, but she becomes a forceful figure. Yes, that's one narrative line, but it's also about a bagel being the portal to the universe, and it's about if you act silly, you'll be transported to another place. And for me, it was an anything goes.
Lots of painters and sculptors, for example, don't want to talk about their art. They're like, I don't want to get in the way of the viewer interpreting it how they want.
Right.
It's here for people to interpret different ways. I don't really dig that, but whatever. The Everything Everywhere All at Once, I came out, I was like, this is the best film on generational trauma ever.
Right. That's one of the things it's about, but it's only one of the things, and it's sort of like, we'll throw in everything in the kitchen sink and just hope some of it lands.
Right.
We were talking before the show began about the films like Airplane. One of the things about them was they knew that it was random, but they accepted that, and it was going to be about, we have no higher message other than to throw new jokes at you every 2 seconds. Some of them will work. Some of them are going to be absolutely lame. Some of them will work because they're lame. What bothered me about Everything Everywhere All at Once was, Airplane has no earnestness.
No pretense.
No pretense. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas Everything Everywhere All at Once at times has no pretense. There's this silly moment where two rocks are talking to each other.
Google eyes.
Yeah. And then there's these moments that are about ethnic identity and mother-daughter relationship. And I would have I guess I would prefer either go completely silly, be Airplane, or be a serious film about issues. For example, a film I like a lot is The Florida Project, the Sean Baker film about a welfare mom in Florida. It's incredibly hard-hitting. There's no silliness. There are characters in it who act silly as a defense for the terrible lives they have. But it's this kind of neo-realist, hard-hitting film about people on the edge of precarity. It's not an easy film. It's a single mom and her 6-year-old daughter, and they're just living in this motel trying to get by down the road from Disneyland. And
I love that detail.
Yeah, and that becomes important to the film. There's a moment where they hitchhike out of town because the only place you can see all the fireworks is from a vantage point that's 3 miles down the road. Yeah. So they're on the road thumbing a ride so they can see Disney's fireworks, because they could never afford to go into Disneyland. And then clearly they have to go back to their motel, and it's this onerous sense of, while there's this magic kingdom down the road, you have to live in absolutely bleak, hopeless situation.
It sounds very bleak.
Yeah, it's a very hard film, but it's a great film.
And do you see most of your films at home or on DVD or VCR or whatever, or in theaters?
It depends. Interestingly, although I'm very different from my students in a lot of ways, I'm similar to them. There's a term now which is platform agnostic, which means they'll take a film on whatever platform,
on their phone, or
it could be their phone, it could be their iPad, it could be, and you see that now with certain movies being released in multiple platforms. So I haven't yet seen it, but Hail Mary Project, you can see it in 35, you can see it in digital, you can see it in IMAX, you can see it in 70 millimeters. So you can choose your platform. So I will try to see film in theaters when I can. There's some limits. This is neither here nor there. I have a hearing problem, so I don't hear well in theaters. So unless a movie theater has closed caption, Lyceum does.
Right. And do you have hearing aids?
Yeah, they don't help for this.
Do you read lips?
Not well.
Yeah. But between whatever the hearing aids do and
if a movie has no assisted device, I probably will skip it.
Right.
Lyceum has.
That's the Red Hook.
Yes, Red Hook multiplex.
Right.
Upstate is increasingly showing films with assistive devices. But I grew up. It was interesting. I was just talking about this with a colleague at another university today. When I was a kid, we didn't distinguish the platforms that much because we were seeing a lot of film on TV. And the example there's a friend he's writing a book about Universal monster movies of the late 30s and into the 40s.
Wow.
So Universal was the studio that had Dracula, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. And then they started doing things like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And in the 50s, Universal sold the entire package of horror to TV. So when I was growing up, that's where you saw Abbott and Costello and Meet Frankenstein.
Yeah.
I never saw it in a movie theater.
Oh, yeah. And not on one of the networks, but on Channel 13 or 11.
Yeah, WR,
Channel
or WPIX,
19.
And for me, that wasn't a compromise that I could have seen in a theater.
Right.
For me, it's the film, and I'm seeing it on TV, and that's fine enough.
So you were a kid, you grew up in New York City.
Yeah.
What were some of the first movies you saw that made you just think, fuck, what is that? That's amazing.
Well, I should say the first two movies I saw, I know, one was The Greatest Show on Earth, the Cecil B. DeMille film, which I saw at the Elmsford Drive-In. And I don't remember much about it, but it's interesting because that's the first film Steven Spielberg saw, and you see that in The Fabelmans.
Oh, wow.
The film that actually wasn't the first film I saw, but the film that marked me, and I would have been a little older, was probably 10, 12, 13, somewhere in there, was Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know if you know the film.
Yeah, I saw that when I was like 16 at the Dollar Movie Theater in Cincinnati.
And I was just blown away by it because I think it's the perfect movie for perfect film for understanding what it means to make a film and be thinking about every shot. For example, if you remember, there's a moment where the hero is playing a tennis match and the camera zooms in on his bad guy opponent who's sitting in the stands, and all the spectators are watching the ball go back and forth, but this one figure is only looking at the tennis player, so he's not watching the ball.
What a great shot.
And it's a great shot, and you can see why it's in the film.
Yeah.
So you immediately understand that film isn't just a narrative, it's a filmic rendition of that narrative.
Right.
So you have to think about where the camera is. And that film for me was, I think, formative of that idea that filmmakers do things with a purpose.
Right. Just amazing. And when you were a kid, where were you, Queens?
Well, I was born in New York City. We moved to Westchester County.
Okay.
And then moved across the line into Putnam County. So.
Wow. What was the first movie theater that made you go, fuck, this is amazing?
Well, we had the Paramount Theater, which was an old movie palace that's still in Peekskill. It's now an arts center. And it was great. Something that was different then than now, which is you could buy a ticket and stay all day. So we would watch films multiple times in the same day.
Did you have a sibling?
A daughter, a sister, but I'm not close to her.
So we was you and your friends?
Yeah, it was guys. And we would, I wrote a book about The Great Escape, which I saw at the Paramount.
Right.
The other formative thing, though, was TV, and in particular, I always forget if it's PIX or WR, so it's either 9 or 11, had a thing called The $1 Million Movie. And Scorsese also talks about The $1 Million Movie. The $1 Million Movie would twice a day show the same film for an entire week. And so Scorsese talks about he'd see the film the first time on Monday, and he'd follow the story. The next day, he'd watch it saying, I'm going to concentrate on lighting, or I'm going to concentrate on camera. And you'd watch the same film 5 times in a row.
You guys are a freak.
Yeah. And you'd learn a lot about movies that way.
Right. And you did some of that too.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And
what a treat. What's out right now that you really want to see?
I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen Hail Mary Project. I want to see that.
Okay.
One of my students just did a online review of the new Boots Riley movie, which sounded really interesting.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm working on a project. A lot of what I see relates to that project. So earlier today, I was watching a Sinatra film that I had seen a while back and sort of got
what was it called?
Higher and Higher. It's his first major role in a movie. He plays a character named Frank Sinatra.
Oh.
It's a musical.
There's some movie where he plays like a heroin addict or something.
Oh, The Man with the Golden Arm.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, guess what? We're out of time. Go figure. Dana Polan, thank you so much for being here. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. I'm just going to read a public service announcement right now from a friend who's in a play. Opens Saturday, June 6th at the Woodstock Playhouse. It's an original musical by Robert Arleo. It's called Love Stories, Neat or on the Rocks, set inside a fictional bar named Hadley's. And it sounds really interesting. If you want more information, you go to playhouse.org. And I love making plugs for art events. And I love talking to artists, which you certainly are. One last question. We have time. Are movies art or films art? Is cinema art?
Can be. Not always, but it can be.
Are films more art than movies?
A different kind of art. There's an art of escapism, and then there's an art of reflection.
All right. Good. Yeah. Well, again, Dana Polan, thank you so much for being here. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to the Epicurean for letting us park the studio back here, and thanks to producer extraordinaire Jen Hammoud for pushing all the right buttons and making it possible. Have a great weekend. Good night.